Hollywood legend Denzel Washington walked off Jimmy Kimmel Live last night. After a heated exchange about the host's controversial vaccine mandate, comments turned into an all-out verbal war that left the studio audience stunned, and social media ablaze. The tension was palpable from the moment Denzel Washington stepped onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set. What was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance for his latest directorial project quickly devolved into one of the most shocking confrontations in late-night television history. The Academy Award winner, known for his composed demeanor and thoughtful responses, found himself face-to-face with a host who seemed determined to provoke rather than entertain. The evening began innocuously enough. Kimmel, sporting his characteristic smirk, welcomed Washington with the usual fanfare. The audience, packed with fans eager to see the beloved actor, erupted in applause as Washington took his seat. But something felt different. Kimmel's usual, jovial energy carried an undercurrent of smugness that would soon prove explosive. "Denzel, thanks for being here," Kimmel began, his tone already carrying a hint of condescension. "I have to ask, you've been pretty quiet about a lot of the political stuff happening lately. Some people might say that's interesting, given your platform." Washington's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The veteran actor had weathered decades of Hollywood politics and knew a loaded question when he heard one. His response was measured but firm. "Jimmy, I'm here to talk about my film. I think people are smart enough to make their own decisions about politics without needing actors to tell them what to think." The host leaned back in his chair, clearly unsatisfied with the diplomatic response. "But don't you think celebrities have a responsibility? I mean, when people like Joe Rogan are spreading misinformation about vaccines, don't you feel obligated to speak up?" The mention of Joe Rogan was no accident. Kimmel had been vocal about his disdain for the podcast host's approach to discussing medical topics, and he seemed to be testing Washington's stance. But the actor wasn't taking the bait. "I think everyone has a responsibility to do their own research and consult with their doctors," Washington replied, his voice steady but with an edge creeping in. "I don't think it's my place to tell people what medical decisions to make." Kimmel's expression shifted, the practiced smile faltering for a moment. "Research, huh? You mean like doing your own research on Facebook?" The audience laughed nervously, sensing the growing tension. Washington's eyes narrowed. "No, Jimmy. I mean talking to actual doctors, reading actual studies, not just accepting whatever narrative fits a particular agenda." The word agenda hung in the air like a challenge. Kimmel's face flushed slightly and his next words came out sharper than intended. "Agenda? What agenda would that be, Denzel? The agenda of keeping people alive? The agenda of shutting down anyone who asks questions," Washington shot back, his composure finally cracking. "The agenda of dividing people instead of bringing them together. You sit here every night making jokes about people who think differently. Then you do calling them stupid, calling them dangerous. That's not comedy, Jimmy, that's propaganda." The audience fell silent. This wasn't the light-hearted banter they'd come to expect. Kimmel's hands clenched around his interview cards, his knuckles white. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of the unprecedented breakdown in decorum. "Propaganda?" Kimmel's voice rose an octave. "I'm trying to save lives here, Denzel. I'm trying to fight against the kind of dangerous thinking that got people killed during the pandemic." Washington leaned forward in his chair, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And who made you the arbiter of truth, Jimmy? When did a comedian become qualified to determine what's dangerous thinking and what isn't?" The question hit like a physical blow. Kimmel's face went red, and for a moment he seemed to struggle for words. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what appeared to be the complete breakdown of a professional relationship playing out in real time. "I have a platform," Kimmel finally managed, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "I have a responsibility to use it correctly." "You have a responsibility to entertain people," Washington countered. not to lecture them, not to shame them, and certainly not to destroy the careers of people who disagree with you. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Everyone in the studio knew what Washington was referring to: the systematic targeting of comedians, actors, and public figures who had dared to question official narratives during the pandemic. Kimmel had been at the forefront of that campaign, using his platform to mock and marginalize dissenting voices. Kimmel's mask finally slipped completely. Maybe if more people had listened to voices of reason instead of conspiracy theorists and grifters, we wouldn't have lost so many lives. Washington stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound echoed through the silent studio like a gunshot. And maybe if more people had the courage to ask questions instead of blindly following authority, we'd live in a free society instead of whatever this has become. The confrontation had reached a boiling point, with neither man willing to back down, and the audience sensing that something unprecedented was about to unfold. The studio lights seemed to burn brighter as Washington towered over Kimmel, who remained seated but visibly shaken. The host's usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by a defensive posture that made him appear smaller than ever before. Behind the cameras, producers frantically gestured to each other, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the explosive moment play out. "Sit down, Denzel," Kimmel said, his voice attempting authority but betraying a tremor. "Let's have a civilized conversation here." Washington's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Civilized? You mean like how you civilized Dave Chappelle when he made jokes you didn't like? Or how you civilized Ricky Gervais for defending free speech? Your version of civilized seems to involve destroying anyone who doesn't march to your drumbeat." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a public reckoning years in the making. Kimmel's face cycled through emotions: anger, fear, indignation, before settling on righteous fury. "Those people crossed lines," Kimmel spat. "They hurt people with their words. Sometimes you have to take a stand against hate." "Hate?" Washington's voice rose for the first time, causing several audience members to jump. "Questioning authority is hate? Making jokes is hate? Having different opinions is hate? Jimmy, you've redefined hate to mean anything that makes you uncomfortable." Kimmel shot to his feet, finally matching Washington's stance. The two men faced each other across the coffee table like gladiators in an arena, their mutual contempt now fully exposed. "I've redefined it to mean protecting vulnerable people from dangerous rhetoric." "Vulnerable people," Washington repeated mockingly. "You mean your audience? The people you've trained to be offended by everything, to look for enemies everywhere, to demand that everyone who disagrees with them be silenced? You've made them vulnerable, Jimmy. You've made them weak." The accusation struck deep. Kimmel's jaw worked silently for a moment before he found his voice again. "At least I'm not standing on the sidelines while democracy dies. At least I'm fighting for something." "You're fighting for conformity," Washington shot back. "You're fighting for a world where everyone thinks exactly like you do, where dissent is crushed, where asking questions is forbidden. That's not democracy, Jimmy. That's fascism with a laugh track." The word fascism electrified the room. Gasps rippled through the audience, and even the normally stone-faced camera operators exchanged glances. Kimmel's face went white, then red, then purple with rage. "How dare you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible but somehow carrying to every corner of the studio. "How dare you compare me to fascists when I'm fighting against actual fascists? When I'm trying to save this country from people who would destroy it?" Washington stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Save it from who, Jimmy? From half the population that doesn't agree with you? From parents who want to protect their children? From workers who lost their jobs because they wouldn't comply with mandates you cheered for? You're not saving anything. You're dividing and conquering." "Those people made their choices," Kimmel snarled. "Actions have consequences. Maybe if they weren't so selfish, so ignorant, so willing to believe lies over science. There it is, Washington interrupted, his voice cutting through Kimmel's rant like a blade. The real Jimmy Kimmel. Not the funny guy, not the entertainer, but the elitist who thinks he's better than everyone else, who thinks his audience is too stupid to think for themselves, who thinks anyone who disagrees with him is subhuman. The studio fell into dead silence. Even the whispered conversations among crew members ceased. Kimmel stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as if Washington's words had physically struck him. The mask had been completely torn away, revealing something ugly underneath. I don't think, Kimmel stammered, but Washington wasn't finished. You don't think what? That you've spent years mocking and demonizing people? That you've used your platform to destroy careers and silence voices? That you've turned comedy into a weapon of conformity? Washington's voice grew stronger with each accusation. Look at yourself, Jimmy. Look at what you've become. Kimmel's hands shook as he gripped the edge of his desk. I became someone who fights for what's right. Someone who doesn't stay silent when bad things happen. Someone who uses their platform responsibly. Responsibly? Washington's eyebrows shot up. Is it responsible to mock parents grieving their children? Is it responsible to celebrate people losing their livelihoods? Is it responsible to turn your audience into a mob that attacks anyone who thinks differently? Each question hit like a physical blow. Kimmel's carefully constructed worldview was crumbling in real time, and everyone could see it. The host who had spent years confidently dispensing moral judgments suddenly looked small and uncertain. They brought it on themselves, Kimmel whispered, but even he seemed to know how hollow the words sounded. Washington shook his head slowly, disappointment replacing anger in his expression. That's what every tyrant says, Jimmy. They brought it on themselves. They deserved it. They made me do it. You've become everything you claim to oppose. The truth of the statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Kimmel looked around, desperately seeking support from his audience, his crew, anyone who might validate his position. But all he found were shocked faces and uncomfortable silence. This isn't, Kimmel started, then stopped, then started again. This isn't how this was supposed to go. Washington's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. No, Jimmy, it's exactly how it was supposed to go. The truth was always going to come out eventually. The words hit Kimmel like a sledgehammer. His legs seemed to give out as he slumped back into his chair, the fight temporarily drained from him. But the momentary vulnerability quickly transformed into something more dangerous. Wounded pride mixed with desperate fury. His eyes darted to the cameras, then to his audience, calculating his next move like a cornered animal. You think you're some kind of moral authority? Kimmel's voice cracked as he struggled to regain control. You think because you've won some awards, because you've played some heroes on screen, that makes you better than me? I've been fighting the real fights while you've been playing pretend. Washington remained standing, his posture relaxed but alert. I never claimed to be better than anyone, Jimmy. But I also never claimed to be the voice of moral truth for millions of people. I never used my platform to destroy lives. Destroy lives? Kimmel's laugh was harsh and bitter. I've saved lives. Every person who got vaccinated because of what I said. Every person who didn't fall for conspiracy theories because I exposed them. Those are lives saved. And every person who lost their job because they wouldn't comply with your mandates, Washington countered. Every family torn apart because you convinced them their loved ones were enemies. Every comedian who stopped making jokes because they were afraid of your mob. What about those lives, Jimmy? The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Some were filming with their phones, despite security's earlier warnings. This wasn't just television anymore. It was history being made in real time. Kimmel's face contorted with rage. Those people made choices, bad choices, dangerous choices. Someone had to hold them accountable. Someone, Washington repeated slowly, and you appointed yourself as that someone. You became judge, jury, and executioner for anyone who didn't think exactly like you. When did a late-night comedian become qualified to determine who deserves to be destroyed? When democracy was under attack, Kimmel screamed, his composure finally shattering completely. Spittle flew from his lips as he jabbed his finger at Washington. When fascists were trying to take over, when people were dying because of misinformation, someone had to stand up. Washington's voice remained calm, which only seemed to infuriate Kimmel more. And in standing up against fascism, you became what you claimed to fight. You became the thought police, Jimmy. You became the Ministry of Truth. I became a patriot. Kimmel's voice cracked on the word. I became someone who cares more about this country than my own comfort. Unlike some people who hide behind their fame and stay silent when evil is winning. Evil, Washington repeated, shaking his head sadly. You've convinced yourself that everyone who disagrees with you is evil. That's not patriotism, Jimmy. That's fanaticism. The accusation seemed to break something inside Kimmel. His hands began to shake visibly, and his breathing became rapid and shallow. I'm not a fanatic. I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to protect people. From what? From thinking for themselves? From asking questions? From making their own choices? Washington's voice grew gentler but more devastating. Jimmy, you've spent so long fighting monsters that you became one yourself. The truth of it was written across Kimmel's face. For just a moment the mask slipped completely, and everyone could see the broken, frightened man underneath. But the vulnerability lasted only seconds before the anger rushed back in like a tide. Don't you dare, Kimmel whispered, his voice deadly quiet. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what it's like to watch this country tear itself apart while people like you do nothing. People like me. Washington's eyebrows rose. What exactly are people like me, Jimmy? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Kimmel's mouth opened and closed several times, his brain apparently wrestling with words he wanted to say, but knew he shouldn't. The studio held its collective breath. People who have the power to make a difference but choose not to, Kimmel finally managed, but everyone could hear the words he hadn't said lurking beneath. Washington stepped closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. Say what you really think, Jimmy. We've come this far. Don't stop being honest now. Kimmel started, then stopped, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal's. I think some people have had it easy for so long they can't see when things are falling apart. It was a careful deflection, but Washington wasn't, letting him off the hook. Some people. Which people? Specifically? The pressure was unbearable. Kimmel's carefully constructed public persona was disintegrating before everyone's eyes, and he knew it. His political allies, his network bosses, his audience. They were all watching him fall apart in real time. You want me to say it? Kimmel whispered, his voice barely audible. You want me to say something that will end my career, destroy everything I've built. But I'm not going to give you that satisfaction. Washington's expression was almost pitying now. Jimmy, your career destroyed. Itself the moment you decided to become a political operative instead of an entertainer. I'm not doing anything to you that you haven't already done to yourself. The words were like a death sentence. Kimmel looked around desperately, seeking some escape, some way to salvage the situation. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from the truth that everyone could now see clearly. In that moment of complete exposure, something snapped inside Kimmel. The facade of reasoned liberalism cracked completely, revealing the authoritarian impulse that had been growing beneath. His face twisted into an expression of pure hatred as he pointed a trembling finger at Washington. You people, he hissed, the words dripping with venom. You people think you can just waltz in here and lecture me about morality? You think because you're successful, because you're beloved, that gives you the right to tear down everything I've built? The slip was unmistakable. You people! The audience collectively gasped, phones capturing every second as Kimmel's mask finally fell away completely. Washington's expression hardened, recognizing the ugly truth behind those words. There it is, Washington said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent studio. The real Jimmy Kimmel. Not the progressive champion, not the defender of democracy, but just another bigot who thinks his prejudices are principles. I'm not, Kimmel started, but the words died in his throat. He could see it in every face around him. His crew, his audience, his producers. They all heard what he'd said, understood what he'd revealed about himself. You're not what, Jimmy? Washington pressed, his voice steady but implacable. You're not exactly what you've shown yourself to be? A man so consumed by his own righteousness that he's forgotten what decency looks like? Kimmel's breathing was ragged now, his shirt soaked with sweat under the studio lights. I've dedicated my life to fighting injustice. I've used my platform to make the world better. I've sacrificed everything for the cause. What cause? Washington's question cut through the air like a blade. The cause of silencing dissent? The cause of destroying anyone who questions you? The cause of dividing people into allies and enemies based on their willingness to submit to your worldview? The cause of stopping fascism, Kimmel screamed, his voice breaking. The cause of protecting democracy from people who would destroy it. Washington shook his head slowly, sadness replacing anger in his expression. Jimmy, you became the very thing you claimed to be fighting. You became the fascist. You became the threat to democracy. The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Kimmel looked around wildly, seeking support, validation, anything that might save him from the truth. But he found only shocked faces and uncomfortable silence. This is insane, Kimmel whispered, his voice barely audible. This is completely insane. I'm the good guy here. I'm the one fighting for what's right. Good guys don't destroy careers for asking questions, Washington replied firmly. Good guys don't turn audiences into mobs. Good guys don't use their platforms as weapons against anyone who thinks differently. The truth was undeniable now, laid bare for everyone to see. Kimmel's entire identity, built on the foundation of moral superiority, was crumbling in real time. His hands shook as he gripped his desk, knuckles white with strain. I can't. This isn't. Kimmel struggled to form coherent thoughts. Everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed, it was all for the greater good. The greater good, Washington repeated, his voice heavy with disappointment. That's what every tyrant says, Jimmy. That's what every authoritarian uses to justify their cruelty. The greater good, the final blow landed with devastating accuracy. Kimmel's legs seemed to give out as he sank into his chair, the fight completely drained from him. The studio fell into complete silence, broken only by the quiet hum of cameras still rolling. Washington straightened his jacket and looked directly into the nearest camera. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed tonight is what happens when entertainment becomes propaganda, when comedy becomes conformity, when hosts become commissars. He turned back to Kimmel, who sat slumped in his chair like a defeated boxer. Jimmy, I came here tonight to promote a film about redemption, about finding your way back from darkness. I hope someday you'll understand that message. Washington's voice was firm but not unkind. But right now, you're too lost in your own righteousness to see the damage you've done. With that, Washington turned and walked toward the exit. The audience remained frozen, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply sit in stunned silence. As he reached the edge of the stage, Washington paused and looked back one final time. The entertainment industry used to bring people together, Jimmy. It used to heal divides, not create them. Maybe it's time to remember that. Then he was gone, leaving behind a shattered host, a stunned audience, and footage that would change late-night television forever. Kimmel sat alone at his desk, staring blankly at his hands, as crew members whispered among themselves, and producers frantically tried to figure out how to salvage the disaster. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing Kimmel's complete breakdown before finally cutting to commercial. But it was too late. The damage was done. The mask had fallen away completely, revealing not a progressive champion, but a broken man consumed by his own hatred and fear. In the days that followed, the footage would go viral, sparking nationwide conversations about the role of entertainment in politics, the responsibility of public figures, and the dangers of moral fanaticism. Kimmel's ratings would plummet as advertisers fled and guests canceled appearances. The man who had appointed himself as America's moral conscience had been exposed as just another fallen idol. Washington's words proved prophetic. The confrontation had indeed highlighted the importance of respect and professionalism in the entertainment industry, and the terrible cost of abandoning those principles in favor of political warfare. The show that was supposed to bring laughter had instead brought only division and destruction. The truth, as Washington had promised, had finally come out.